Matrix Resurrections is what you get when you put the original Matrix into Google Translate, convert it to Polish, and then convert it back. It is nothing but a worse version of the original film where almost nothing new is added and almost everything is regurgitated. Don't believe me? Here's the plot of Matrix Resurrections. Let me know if any of it feels a tad familiar to you. We begin with an action scene showing Trinity escaping a bunch of agents. We then follow Neo going about his everyday life, but feeling something's wrong. He's just not satisfied. Then a woman shows him her tattoo and... oh, sorry, wrong film. Then a woman shows him her tattoo and introduces him to Morpheus, who tells Neo his reality isn't real.
No one can be told what the Matrix is. Blah, blah, blah.
See, even the movie is boring itself with its own repetition. He then wakes up in a machine tank, is introduced to the crew of a mobile resistance ship, then has a fight with Morpheus in a digital dojo. My god, this is getting ridiculous. We then have an exposition phase where Neo learns all about this big dystopian real world. He meets an elderly sage figure who imparts wisdom, and from that point on, the movie is all about a character who Neo cares deeply about, being held hostage by the machines, facing imminent death. And so Neo and team must fight against overwhelming odds to go and rescue them. Everything I just said, all of those plot beats, they are ripped straight from the original Matrix. And there are more parallels, like how it ends on the note of Neo telling the machines he's going to liberate everyone in the Matrix, but you get the picture. And to the people watching who may be thinking, so what? The film was just paying homage to the original story. No, this isn't homage, because when you boil it down, homage is simply a respectful reference. One easy-to-reach example of homage is from Matrix 1. When Neo and Smith stare each other down in the subway, we get this. This is of course a homage to the classic Western trope where, instead of a tumbleweed before the shootout, we get a newspaper. There is a difference between that, where you have a brief reference to another work, emphasis on brief, and outright laziness, where you've got a homework assignment you can't really be asked to put in effort, so you ask the person next to you if you can copy theirs, to which they reply, alright, but change enough of it so it isn't too obvious. That analogy is the Matrix Resurrections in a nutshell. And there's something quite interesting here, as it's precisely because of this that the pacing for the first 50 minutes of the movie is unbearably slow. And I know that's an odd connection to make, but give me a second and it'll make more sense. I believe the thing that makes for a compelling plot is unpredictability, where the plot constantly makes unexpected twists and turns, but at the same time, every last twist feels intuitive. Perhaps a side character has their motivation, but then they do something totally unexpected. However, when they do it, it only makes sense to us because it's still in line with their motivation, just in an unforeseen way. I believe that's the essence of good plotting, being unpredictably intuitive. And as a consequence of Matrix Resurrections being mostly a carbon copy of the first, the moment we first see Neo going through his boring life, we know Morpheus is going to give him a talk at some point. We know Neo is going to wake up in one of those tanks in the real world. And due to this total predictability, instead of the viewer being on the edge of their seat trying to guess what's happening next like in the original, in Resurrections, they're slumped back in their seat, biding time, waiting for that inevitable plot point. Because of this, it's an outright frustrating viewing experience, where while Neo's going about his everyday life, a good chunk of the audience can't help but think,
get on with it! Yes, get on with it!
because it feels like the movie is burning time. In reality, it's not burning time any more than most films do, it's just giving us an industry standard first act. And I find that really interesting, because it just goes to show how important unpredictability is in storytelling. And if you're a long-time viewer of this channel, I assume you want to be a better writer, seeing as how that's the mission statement of The Closer Look, for both you and me to break down stories so we can tell better ones ourselves. On this, what I want to do is recommend a resource to you that I've learned a lot from, and it's called Stein on Writing. It's honestly one of the best books on storytelling I've ever had, as it doesn't waste time, but rather gets straight to the point, giving out actually useful advice and practical techniques you can use to improve your novels and screenplays. I also want to thank Audible for sponsoring today's video, as because of their support, you can get the audiobook for Stein on Writing today totally for free. You guys know what Audible is. It's basically the best place on the internet to find audiobooks. And while you can use Audible for listening to fiction, which I do myself all the time, it's also a great place to improve your writing craft, as there are so many really good audiobooks on there, packed full of useful advice for you to learn from. If you click my link in the description, audible.com/closerlook, or text closerlook to 500 500, you'll get a free 30-day trial, plus a nice credit you can use to get any audiobook you like on their platform. And you may think I'd recommend you use it to get Stein on writing. No, I don't actually, because that audiobook is a part of the Audible Plus catalogue, meaning that title comes free with any Audible subscription anyway. It means that you can still spend that credit wherever you like. Perhaps you can get On Writing by Stephen King, that's a really good audiobook narrated by Stephen King himself. You can get that, and also get Stein on Writing as well, totally for free. Again, if you want to be a better writer, use my link in the description, audible.com/closerlook, or text closerlook to 500 500 and grab Stein on Writing for free today. Anyway, back to it. Do you want to know why the original Matrix's first act was so compelling to watch? Like, the thing it did that made it so special? It was the intrigue. Normally, a first act will just establish the world and the protagonist before the plot kicks off, which is a fine way to do it. But Matrix 1 also has this well-built mystery going on at the same time. Who is this dangerous criminal Morpheus? Why is he so desperate to contact Neo? How does this woman leap between buildings? And how on earth can these agents seal people's mouths shut? All of these questions are baffling, fascinating, and dramatically increase audience engagement. This was an oversight from Wachowski, as when she copy-pasted the exact same first act from the original, she seemed to forget that big mystery of
what is the Matrix?
Was the biggest reason why the original opening worked so well. And of course, all of these issues compound together, serving to create one of the more poorly paced first acts we've seen in the past few years. But to give credit where it's due, Resurrections does have something fresh to say. It is no secret that Lana Wachowski is trans, and what's quite clear to me at least is the whole film is an allegory for what it's like to go through transitioning. And I know some of you are already typing comments which disagree with this interpretation, but that's only natural seeing as everyone sees different meanings to a work. But think about it, you've got Neo feeling like he's being his inauthentic self. He expresses that, and then the analyst, the symbol for the system at large, tells him his doubts are wrong, and he's exactly how he should be as is. I am sure that when Wachowski wrote that scene, she was channeling her own life experience as to what it felt like when she first voiced her doubts about her identity and people dismissed them. To give credit, from a thematic point of view, this film is unique and has a lot to say, which is more than you can say for most Hollywood movies. But, and it's a big but, while this theme is interesting, theme alone is not enough to sustain a story. At least not enough for the vast majority of cinemagoers who don't mind a good theme, but also want fascinating characters, great world building, and an exciting plot. And if we are to talk about the ideas explored in Matrix 4, I simply can't cover this angle without mentioning how this film didn't just break the fourth wall, it pulverized it. There was a moment near the beginning of this movie where I was getting compelled by the story, when Neo meets Trinity, can't remember her, and they have this awkward handshake, and it had me. I'm not sure why precisely, but I was beginning to care about Neo's journey here. The film had me absorbed, and then in the very next scene, Smith says this.
I'm sure you can understand why our beloved parent company Warner Brothers has decided to make a sequel to the trilogy.
What?
And the tiny bit of investment that last scene had built up, my immersion, this line brought it all crumbling down. Yes, Wachowski was being all very clever with her meta-commentary on how unnecessary the sequel is. Yes, this is the kind of movie that pretentious video essayists, like me, love to analyse because of all the messages and meanings behind it. But these jabs at the studio, while being great video essay material, are not worth the price Wachowski paid for their inclusion because they also ruin any and all immersion the audience may have. And these moments of extreme meta-ness, they happen consistently throughout the film, bringing the audience out of the experience on an annoyingly regular basis. Remember how in the first Matrix, it opens with that call between Trinity and Cypher as they're having this mysterious conversation and we're trying to guess what they're talking about? And then the officer says, I think we can handle one little girl, to which Agent Smith is all like,
No, Lieutenant, your men are already dead.
It gives you goosebumps. It's so intriguing. It raises so many questions. Every storyteller should aspire to create beginnings as gripping as this one. But while the first Matrix has Smith say that bone-chilling line, Matrix Resurrections simply recreates that scene shot for shot, line for line, and the audience isn't engaged here, they're just wondering why the film is repeating what we've already seen. And making this worse, we then have Bugs, the new character, say,
"We know what happens next. We know the story. This is how it all began."
Voicing the thoughts in the audience's heads, and this only tears us out of the experience even further, reminding us that we're sitting in a seat, looking at a screen, watching a work of fiction. This is a truly awful way to begin a story, because you aren't building immersion, you're doing the opposite. Here's the thing about storytelling. The audience wants to believe your lie. They want to forget they're watching fiction. They want immersion. Therefore, immersion is a quality of good storytelling. I don't think that's too controversial an opinion to say. The only exception I can think of where it's fine to not worry about immersion is if you're doing an outrageous comedy like Team America or Deadpool. In that, your priority isn't really telling a great story, instead it's just being as funny as possible. If that's your aim, fourth wall breaks are totally fine to use. Now, there's a sentiment thrown around the video essay scene, and it's one I disagree with. It's that if a movie cashes in on nostalgia, that's bad. If you ask me, this is dead wrong, because nostalgia, when it's done right, is nothing but icing on the cake. It is nothing but good. However, there's a trick to doing nostalgia right. You have to treat it like a spice, like a little something extra you throw in to enhance an already well done scene. This is the main mistake all of these reboots and sequels are making these days with nostalgia. Instead of treating it like a nice little extra, they make it the substance of the scene, and just like snuffing a handful of cinnamon powder, it doesn't exactly make for a satisfying meal. A perfect example of this is in Matrix Resurrections when Merivangian shows up. When he does, the audience goes, "Hey look, it's that French bloke from the second one," and we get our nostalgia cash-in high, which inevitably fades almost immediately. And then he goes on rambling for 2 minutes, for 3 minutes, and on the 4th minute he just spits on the floor and walks off? Was that it? What is the point of that scene, the audience asks? What did that add to the narrative? It's such a pointless use of the character. Here's a quick suggestion on a better way to do this. What if we had a scene around the midpoint where the big baddie, the analyst, goes into an underpass and speaks to a mysterious figure, promising him a chance to regain all he's lost, to get revenge. And then the scene ends on a smiling Merivangian coming out of the shadows, finally being revealed. And then he's a minor secondary villain from then on, and Neo's got to contend with him, feeding into the main plot. That is how you do nostalgia. That would have been a way better use of the character. But sadly, this mishandling of legacy characters, it's much more pervasive than this one cameo. And this leads us to what I think's one of the weakest points of this whole movie. Agent Smith. So why did Wachowski include Smith in this film? Her reasoning was simple. Agent Smith was a great character in the originals, therefore he must be in the reboot. And that thought is fine, actually. It's the same kind of thought as, well, Han Solo was a great part of the original Star Wars, so we've got to bring him back for the new ones. But, crucially, while it's a fine thought, it doesn't go far enough. Because you've got to also ask the question, how can I ensure they play a crucial role in the story? Just like with Merivangian. As I imagine, the real Smith might say, they must serve purpose, and the more purpose, the better. Perhaps they cause the inciting incident, or greatly influence the protagonist's arc, or anything really, so long as they aren't redundant. This is something Matrix Resurrections failed to do for Smith, and they failed totally. It's so bad you could simply cut Smith from the movie and everything would make just as much sense. And no moment in the film makes that more obvious to me than the Smith-Neo fight in the middle. Now, many people pointed out that the choreography and editing was just nauseatingly bad here, and that's because it was, let's be honest. But to my eyes, that isn't the main reason why this fight scene just sucks so much. It sucks because when you think about it, this fight has no impact on the narrative. It's pure filler. It's the worst kind of fight scene because it wasn't made to serve the overall story, but instead because they realised, oh crap, it's been 20 minutes since that last fight, therefore we must have one again right here. Inversely to this, Matrix 1 does not fall for this issue even slightly. If you think of the Neo-Smith fight in that one, it's a culmination of of Neo's arc, as like the fight begins with Neo making the choice to not run away, to not go up those stairs, to stand and fight, and Neo is like he's beginning to believe. That scene is so great, not just because it's really well choreographed, but because it signals the end of Neo's character arc as he finally decides to have courage and believe in himself. This whole issue of purposeless fight scenes, I believe it's the single worst writing mistake you can make when it comes to fights. And I would talk about this more, but why would I, when I've already made a perfectly good video called How to Do a Fight Scene, where I basically cover this topic in far more detail, which you're more than free to check out. But on this topic of character purpose, while Morpheus is a step up from Smith in these terms, with him recruiting Neo and playing a role in that final heist, what we got just wasn't enough to justify his existence in the story, I don't think. Here's one for you. What if we just cut out Morpheus entirely? Just totally get rid of him, and then we have Bugs, the new character, fill his role. She inducts him into the Resistance and gives Neo a talk on what is the Matrix. And when we make that change, all of a sudden, the number of characters hogging up finite, valuable screen time goes down by 1. As a general rule for writing, you should strive to ask, does this line of dialogue, or this whole scene, or this character really need to be in the story? If the answer's no, like with Smith, you've got 2 options: either cut them out, or give them something way more important to do. But even if the answer's yes, even if they serve a purpose, that doesn't mean you should still keep them around, because maybe you have 2 characters who barely do enough to justify their own existence, like Bugs and Morpheus. By the skin of their teeth, they can't be classified as purposeless. In that situation, why don't you combine those 2 characters, making your story leaner and freeing up screen time better used for other things? I appreciate this is a subjective point, but then again isn't almost everything when it comes to writing, but the question is it better to have 3 characters, all of which serve a huge role in the story and are given plenty of screen time for us to get to know them? Or is it better to have 5 characters, all of which are mostly fleshed out, and we only give them a small amount of screen time each, stopping us from knowing them as well as we would have those initial 3? If you ask me, the former is usually the best approach, and the latter is what Matrix Resurrections did. Wachowski throwing in all of these classic characters without much thought is something that reflects a major writing lesson I only learned in the past month. It's in a lot of my videos, and especially one I did on June, I gave you guys some really bad advice. I am making an apology video where I basically break down why that Dune essay was really not very well done, and how it taught me that my entire philosophy around storytelling is wrong. If it isn't out already, it should be soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But the essence of this really important lesson I finally learned is, are you adding in this midpoint because your story is stagnating? If so, that's great, because you're demonstrating understanding of why midpoints are used. Or are you throwing in that midpoint for no other reason than you're blindly following the 3-act structure? If so, including this element might be totally unnecessary, and it may be making your story worse. In past videos, I have preached all about these formulas that you must adhere to, but I now realise you should be very cautious of formulas in storytelling where you're given boxes to tick, because in doing that, you may be so focused on ticking each box that you aren't stopping to ask, does this story even need this? I won't go into any more detail here, because that aforementioned apology video will be going into this topic with way more detail. But at the end of the day, it's dead easy to criticise a film, so it's time for me to put my money where my mouth is. Here's my pitch for a better Matrix 4. So we have the movie kick off with Neo inside the Matrix, working his boring office job. However, everything feels unreal, like the editing is sloppy on purpose, the blocking doesn't make any sense. We have a really hard time following Neo and understanding what's going on. He's walking through a door in his 90s style office, when all of a sudden he appears in the Nebuchadnezzar. What more, he sees Trinity on the street, and then a package arrives for him. He accepts it, looking at the postman's face to see he's Cypher from the first film. This just baffles the audience because, what? He's supposed to be dead. Neo asks, do I know you? And Cypher says that line from the original. Did he tell you why you're here? That you're here to save the world? What do you say to something like that? And while he says the line, just for a frame, just a single frame, you show a flash of Cypher sitting in that chair from when he said that line in the original. And Neo looks down, seeing a metal mug inexplicably in his hand. He drops it, backing away, and all of these callbacks come up without any rhyme or reason, so randomly it's almost like we're watching a dream. And Neo is breaking down, screaming out, "What's happening to me?" This replicates the original movie's intrigue because it's bonkers as to what's going on, and we crave answers. But then we have Morpheus turn up, the real Morpheus, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and he says that sadly, they've run out of time. And echoing the original, he tells Neo that he needs to wake up, breaking it to him gently that he spent the past decade trapped in a new Matrix, one made by the humans specifically for Neo. The machines had his corpse at the end of Matrix 3. They preserved it, handed it off to the humans as a gesture of goodwill, and they've been doing all they can to resurrect him. His body was the easy part, they finished that years ago. His mind, however, proved far, far trickier, and this wacky sequence, it turns out, has been them trying to rebuild his consciousness, triggering old memories by exposing him to certain stimuli from the past. But Neo soon awakes, and looming over him is a machine. Neo panics, backing away, but then humans come up and help him, ignoring the fact that there's a machine behind them. And then Morpheus comes along, saying that a lot has changed since his time. Morpheus names the machine and reveals he is one of the many programs that now lives in Zion. And Morpheus explains that while the Matrix still very much exists, when a sentient program faces deletion in the Matrix, they will seek asylum inside Zion. Within Zion, these digital refugees have been trickling in through such a rate they become a significant part of the population, becoming a major part of the workforce, and now humans and programs are struggling to live in the same society. I think I've come up with a good solution to this movie's meta-commentary problem about how the sequel is failing to live up to the legacy of the originals, because there is nothing inherently wrong with exploring that idea. There is, however, plenty wrong with giving it such a blunt delivery that the fourth wall is broken. Here's what I think's a more subtle and a better way to do this. We have this whole exposition phase where Neo is learning about the world, but here's the kicker. He walks out, and everyone kneels before him. Everyone treats him as if he's the next coming of Jesus. He's Neo, for Christ's sake. Literally. Maybe when people swear and curse, they don't say God or Jesus, they curse in Neo's name because now he's revered. He isn't even the chosen one anymore. He's become something more. Perhaps there are actual statues of him in Zion, and everyone says prayers in his name as if they're praying to him for help. His death at the end of Matrix 3 turned him from just a legend of a man into the figurehead of a new religion, one both humans and machines worship. Neo struggles with this, he really does. But then he struggles even more when Morpheus tells him that the peace between man and machine is under incredible strain. It's been many years since the war ended, and Zion's population has boomed ever since. Between their rapid recruitment of people from the Matrix, to the new program swarming in, to how the survivors have been very busy in bed, Zion is now facing a major overpopulation crisis, and their need for resources has never been higher. The machines know this, they fear this, and they've been getting hostile, putting up a blockade around Zion to ensure all of these excess humans don't spread and repopulate Earth. All who try to flee are forcibly thrown back. Fortunately, no one's died yet, but it's only a matter of time. The machines know there are only so many resources on the planet. If humanity is allowed to grow again, there will inevitably be another war for these resources. So the machines are doing a little culling, some population control, inducing an artificial famine. This is Neo's mission. Zion is starving, their energy supply is dwindling, and the machines have said in their negotiations that once Zion's population is sliced in half and every program is handed over for deletion, only then will the blockade be lifted. Morpheus says all attempts to negotiate have failed, that if something isn't done soon, this will turn into a genocide. And what more, Morpheus will not allow that to happen. He will not let 1 million men, women and children starve. If needs be, he will attack the blockade and start the war all over again. It's his last resort. He knows the consequences will be dire, but he will not allow his people to starve. Neo learns from Morpheus that as humanity runs shockingly low on time, he he is their last hope. This is why Morpheus had to prematurely awake Neo before his mind was whole again, and throughout the film, or maybe even a new trilogy of films, Neo has to rediscover who he is because all of his lost memories are missing, and his powers are mostly gone too. Now that would have been a better movie. In Matrix 4, we basically had no stakes, now we have all of the stakes. And so Morpheus gives Neo his most advanced ship. What would be cool is if we take that new character Bugs and have her be the captain of this new resistance ship for Neo's big mission. However, there's a twist, because she is a sentient program. She is an AI, like a digital refugee taken in by Zion. And my god, would that do such a lovely job at world building, at showing how this society is developed, having humans taking orders from a program because it's their superior. And then you have one person on the ship be like a technophobe who hates all of these infernal machines coming along, hogging their resources, taking their jobs. Okay, maybe that's getting a bit too political, but you get what I mean. And he says in confidence to Neo when no one else is listening that he'd have been the captain if that damn program hadn't come along. And he thinks they're all better off deleted. And he poses the point that if all of the programs were deleted, it would free up a bunch of resources, meaning fewer humans would have to die. And then we have the ethical question of, is a sentient, free-thinking AI's life worth the same as a human's? Like, oh, that screams sci-fi right there. Like, Jesus Christ, like, where is this movie? What parallel universe do I need to visit so I can watch it? But before this big mission, before Neo sets out, he voices his doubts to Morpheus. Privately, he says that he can't live up to these unbelievably high expectations that people are putting on him. And Morpheus sympathizes, saying he knows Neo is no god. How initially, Morpheus tried to quell the religion that sprang up after his death, to convince them that yes, Neo was the chosen one, but he was never a man to be actually worshipped. But his words fell on deaf ears, and he realized it was futile. The people's desire for an idol was too great. Their craving, their need for an ideal they can strive towards. Morpheus could never stamp that out. He could never be so cruel as that. I'm not an ideal, I'm just a man, Neo says. Not to them, says Morpheus. So for their sake, you must be. Your legend has become synonymous with hope. Don't let that legend die, because if it does, our hope goes with it. And this is Neo's core struggle throughout the movie, as he's living up to these impossibly high expectations everyone's putting on him, and how he doesn't believe he can do it, or hell, he knows he can't do it, but he has to nonetheless. And he has really intense imposter syndrome going on because of it. Making matters worse, while he still has some powers, they're much weaker than they were before. Something about his death and resurrection left him mostly depowered. This way we can throw him into plenty of fights where he's nowhere near as OP as he once was, only adding to the fear that he can't live up to what they're asking. Like, that is how you do meta-commentary. Instead of having immersion-shattering fourth wall break after fourth wall break, you instead subtly channel all that same energy into the character's journey of trying to live up to expectations that are simply too high. And I can already see where this story might go, because there are a lot of possibilities with this new world. Perhaps there's an extremist human group in Zion of true technophobes, right? And while Neo is away, perhaps they have a coup, depose Morpheus, and decide to round up all of these programs for deletion. But at the same time, they're tired of living like rats in Zion. They're going to attack the blockade too. Death to all machines, from the smartest AI to the dumbest toaster. That's their philosophy. And then we have that technophobe on Neo's ship, and perhaps he betrays them like Cypher did, or maybe he has a character arc where he comes around and learns to love both organic and synthetic crew members alike. And as a potential ending to this new saga, the machine's motivations are they fear that humans will steal all of their resources, but Neo somehow finds a way to terraform Earth, to get rid of the scorched sky, and in doing so giving the machines abundant solar energy, allowing plants to grow, meaning that the resource problem is far less of a problem. And then all of the programs and machines live in harmony, something like that, I don't know, some mushy happily ever after ending probably. But anyway, hope you like the rewrite. Feel free to support me on Patreon if you want to help me make more of these videos, I really appreciate it, and there is a link down in the description, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.